Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Dear Parents. Today I'm really excited because I get to talk with an old friend, Jennifer Anderson. She is a registered dietitian. She has her master's in sciences of public health, and she's a mom, and she has a huge following on Instagram, and she has a new book coming out called I almost said Eat Them Well. Feed Them Well.
I love it. I love it. Eat them well. That works.
We haven't talked in a long time just because everyone's busy and, life keeps going on. But I wanted to catch up with her and talk about feeding. I feel like feeding continues to be something where parents really struggle. And I wonder if you could talk maybe just in the past decade, what has made it so hard to figure out how to feed kids? Is this a new problem or does it just feel like a new problem?
That's a great question. In some ways, it's not a new problem. And in some ways, it is a new problem. I think a lot of the angst that we have around feeding kids is somewhat manufactured because we have so much information now that we think there is a single research-backed one way to feed kids that's best. And if we do it right and we wean our baby right, and if we do all these things, we're going to have this perfect adventurous eater who's always going to choose to eat the quote healthy foods and all this. That leaves out a lot of the realities of the fact you have a real kid. You are a human. We live in an environment that is just working against you at every turn when it comes to feeding kids. So I think it is harder in some ways to feed them now. And then also we look to more extreme picky eating. And I think that's a more interesting kind of philosophical question. I saw somebody on a post about ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. That's an eating disorder that often shows up as extreme picky eating. And there was a comment there that said, well, there's no kids in third world countries who have ARFID, implying that this is a choice. First of all, obviously they don't understand how to talk about countries with developing economies or anything else. But I'm like, yeah, you know what happens to kids in other countries who have ARFID? They pass away because they don't get what they need. That's what happens. That's why it's less common. That's why it was less common for us. And this is what I believe. There's no data on it because we have ARFID itself is a newer diagnosis. It was officially put into the DSM in 2013. So we don't have a lot of data from here or there. But if you've ever read old books, there's always kind of there's always some sickly kid. There's a sickly kid who's not eating well, not doing this and not doing that. And I think we do have a history of ARFID that is kind of long term. So no, I don't think pickiness is new. I do think the environment that we are living in right now and our mentality as parents has changed. And so it's become complicated, often unnecessarily for us.
That makes sense. Do you feel like I think that from my perspective, in the exam room, talk with a lot of parents who feel overwhelmed and confused because they get mixed messages about you have to do it this way. And there's social media lacks nuance. And so if we hear the message, you must do it this way or something bad is going to happen. And it seems that a lot of the nuance is lost in feeding infants and toddlers in particular.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you hear somebody say, if you do XYZ, your child will XYZ, you can immediately discount that person. I promise you. You have no idea what's going to happen to your child. Neither do you, honestly. And that is one of the things I hammer really hard on in my book is no one else can tell you what's going to happen with your child. We do have these best practices, quote. These best practices are based on the very limited, often very poor child research that we have. Child feeding research is just poor as a field because it's really, really hard to study. The questions that we've asked have been weird. The ways that we survey parents, like we never survey dads, we only survey moms. Well, we do have some research showing dads and moms answer these questions differently. So if we actually had researched like with dad information, we may have gotten totally different results. So all that to say, when somebody says, hey, this is a best practice, it means we're doing our best with the limited information we have to make a recommendation that's going to help the most people. But it
Got
doesn't
it.
mean it's going to help every kid. It may not help your kid. If you're using a strategy and you're like, wow, I hate this. I don't like
Hmm.
how it's affecting my family. I don't like how it's affecting my kid. I think it's making things worse. Don't use it
Right.
because
It probably is
you're
making things worse.
yeah, it probably is making things worse. You're the parent, you're the expert in your family. You're there day in, day out. You're actually trying to figure out what's going on. And so the more that you learn to observe your child and to observe yourself, figure out what's going on here, the more you can get that feedback to say, oh, yeah, hey, this is working. This is working for me. Or, gosh, we got to change course
Right.
because this is not working.
Well, I think that that lends itself to let's write a book because you can only do so much
Exactly.
in 6 second Instagram reels. They're longer than 6 seconds, but most people watch for 6 seconds before they swipe to the
Yeah,
next one.
right.
And so that lends itself to writing a book, I assume, to be able to get more into
Absolutely.
the weeds.
Exactly. Because I was like, you know what? I cannot give a parent a whole crash course in how to solve these dilemmas because in a 15-second 6-second Instagram reel, one
Right.
sentence, a 4-sentence caption, I can't help you figure out how to navigate the real dilemmas you face. Okay, you're a real parent and you just had something really stressful occur in your life. You're
Right.
working on low capacity and all of a sudden your kid starts being picky. How are you going to navigate a situation like that without just feeling awful about yourself and then blaming yourself for your kid's pickiness or who knows? You're going to be overly stressed if you're trying to follow 6-second Instagram bits of advice
They
instead of,
right. They keep
yeah,
conflicting each other too. Like
oh,
you swipe
yeah,
and then someone says the exact opposite.
oh my gosh, right. And they both are like, hey, this is evidence based. It's
Right.
like, okay, yeah, you're probably right because you picked the one study that backed up what you said.
Hmm.
And that's not how research should be used. So, so yeah, I think what parents most need is a framework for making decisions, right? How am I going to make a decision if my kid has two things that seem to be conflicting? Or, something's conflicting between my family culture and my kid's medical needs, or my kid's relationship with food and their body. And all of
Right.
a sudden, they come down with a health condition. Do I limit how many cookies do they have, or like, how does all that work? There's so many questions, and I think rather than these little pat answers that come with social media, it needed a
Hmm.
book. You need a paragraph. You need a paragraph on that, or do you need a
Right.
framework for that? Like, how are you going to make these decisions? So when you have that, and when you're thinking, you know what, I am the expert, therefore I need to watch my child while also at the same time realizing I may need outside guidance. I may
Right.
need outside information. I may, there's lots of ways that we can become the parents that our kids need. And that often
Hmm.
comes from watching them, using our own common sense, and then also gathering other resources.
One thing that you talk about in the book, which is not available yet, but you should pre-order it because I've already read it and it's great, is predictable parenting. And so
Yes.
the idea of like being consistent, having a routine, having clear expectations. What makes this hard for parents? And then what can I, if I'm an overbusy, stressed out parent, do to start putting some of those practices into place, like one little piece at a time, so that I can build towards predictable meal times?
Start small.
Okay.
Let's not start with everything, right? So we're going to start with what I like to tell parents is kind of look at all the problems that you feel that you're having, and then either say which one is the one that is causing the most problems for you,
Hmm.
or which one is an easy win. You're going to have to pick one thing to start working on. Otherwise, you're going to get overwhelmed. In my house, I had a kid who really needed to work on eating more calories, and I had a
Hmm.
kid who struggled with constipation. Problem is, they both have to be fed the same thing. Otherwise, oh my gosh, can you imagine feeding one kid one food and another kid another food? That's never going to fly in my house. When I
Right.
put food in front of them, the first thing they do is look and see what the other kid got.
Exactly. Yeah. Even our 4-year-old was like, that's not fair.
That's not fair. Like,
Yeah.
how is that not fair? You've never not had enough food. So, so we had to choose. We had to
Hmm.
choose which one are we going to focus on because those high fiber foods are low in calories. So, given our situation, we had to focus on the calories first, and then we had to work on the constipation in the other kid. We're constantly having to make these calls. But I think when it comes to that predictable parenting, it's okay, what what is the biggest thing where you're like, oh, this is hard? Now, if you're just coming to it and you're like, everything is chaos and I
Right.
don't know where to start. If you want one thing for me to just kind of say this is probably where I would start, it would be the meal schedule, the
Okay.
meal routine.
Meaning like the
Like
times of
what
day, like the
time
times. Hmm.
what time some people don't do it by time. That's fine. What time, what order in the day are you going to serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and
Got
then
it.
snacks depending on your kids' sleep and wake and school schedule and all of that. The reason is if you serve, breakfast at the same time or in the same flow every morning,
Hmm.
you serve lunch around the same time, same for dinner, all these things. Your child's biological rhythm actually will help you. So the
Right.
more consistent you are, the more your child's going to release their hunger, fullness hormones, their digestive juices, all this stuff is going to start to get them getting hungry at the right time and then when they're hungry, they eat and are more full. When they're hungry, food tastes better. They are more likely to eat a variety of foods. So if I had to just pick one thing, that's probably the one I would start with is
Just
like,
start at like a
this
similar
is when
time of
we eat.
day. Yeah. This
This
is
is
when we
when
eat.
we eat.
Talk to me about grazing then, because I know a lot of families that get into the habit of like grazing and constantly having snacks and feeling like their kids never eat much at meal times because they're grazing all the time.
Yeah, that's so hard. And we've gotten into these habits at times in our house as well. Here's the thing about grazing. So when a kid is grazing, they can't ever really feel hunger and fullness. It kind of blurs the lines. Am I hungry? Am I full? Do I just feel kind of snacky? A
Hmm.
kid can also start to think, oh, maybe boredom is the same feeling as hunger.
Yeah,
The internal cues are just less clear. Like,
totally.
am I really hungry or am I any sad, lonely, bored, these other things. So that skill of being able to read your internal cues, which is called interoception,
Hmm.
that is just harder. It's harder when you're grazing. The other thing is your mouth doesn't have a chance, your teeth don't have a chance to recover. So it's really hard
Sure.
on teeth to always be eating. Also, it can be a contributor to constipation, which is really common in kids
Yeah.
because what's happening is you're never triggering the reflex in the stomach to that actually triggers the digestive system to kind of move things along.
Right. Like
So
the
there's
gastrocolic
stretch
sort of
receptors.
reflex.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So there's those stretch receptors. If you trigger them, that can actually help with just kind of moving everything along. So when we're grazing, there's a lot of downstream effects of that. Humans actually weren't meant to be eating all the time.
Sure.
And so, you know, the idea of always having to have a snack ready because that's what your kid needs. Biologically, they actually probably need to eat less often and have a more substantial meal.
Sure.
And then also, we know that when kids are snacking, their diet quality tends to go down because what are they going to snack on? Well, in
Right.
my house, they're probably going to snack on crackers. I mean, they're not going to go, for the most part, they're not going to go get a bunch of carrot sticks out of the refrigerator,
Right.
right?
Yeah. These are ultra processed foods by and large that they're
Yeah,
consuming as their kind of
exactly.
chronic snacking.
Right, right. So their diet quality tends to go down. So a grazing kind of style for many kids doesn't do them any favors.
Got it. Now, along those same lines, can we talk a little bit about another internet thing of like there's no unhealthy foods or like all foods are healthy or those sorts of things. I think there's a lot of misconceptions there, and then
Yeah.
parents feel like they can't label food. So can you get into the nuance of that a little bit? Whether it's candy bars, whether it's donuts, whether it's broccoli, or whether it's like foods that are not typically associated with health or not health, but maybe like more ultra processed or minimally processed foods.
Yeah, so I like to think of foods as, um, well, let me start with your question. First off, I actually don't think applying morality to food is helpful.
Right.
It's not going to cause an eating disorder. We don't have any research to show it's going to cause an eating disorder. It's going to ruin your child's relationship with your body. But if your child does have a propensity to an eating disorder and that is triggered, this morality around food can actually be a real stumbling block in that context.
Especially with like good foods or bad foods or like,
Yeah,
oh,
right.
I'm such a bad person. I ate all these donuts or
Exactly.
whatever it might be.
Exactly. So if we're adding on this good, bad language, it's confusing. It's not accurate. Are carrots good? Yeah, unless, unless they're not. I mean, you can
Right.
definitely eat too many carrots.
Sure.
Cookies are good, but they're definitely not good if you're eating a whole meal's worth of cookies at the expense of everything your body needs. So, nuts are very good. They're very, quote, healthy. But if you're allergic to nuts, they're deadly. So I think, and kids know about allergies, they know all these things. Adults are confused about which foods are healthy and which foods are unhealthy. I
Right.
think we need to just kind of leave that to the side because it's just not helpful at this point.
Okay.
At the same time, I think that has to be accompanied by the idea that different foods do different things in your body.
Okay.
That concept is really helpful. And that's where we can very easily say, yeah, cookies aren't a bad food, but they aren't doing much in your body other than enjoyment, which is really
Sure.
important. But it's not going to nourish us long term. When we're talking to kids, especially when they're young, I think they can definitely understand the concept of, yeah, we have some foods a lot, we have some foods not that much. I
Right.
think the younger they are, the less we have to say, the more
Sure.
we're just feeding them. Like we're not giving them cookies for whole meals for the
Right.
most
Like
part.
donuts are a special occasion.
Yeah,
It's
they're a
not our
special
everyday
occasion.
breakfast.
Right.
Oh,
They
huh.
show up
I
here.
only
They
see
show up
this once a
there.
week. Yeah.
Exactly. We can say less is more, I think, the younger they are. Now, as they get older, they're going to be exposed to so much good food, bad food, healthy food, unhealthy food talk that at some point, it really doesn't matter what you're saying, I think, because they've heard it so much. But I do think
Yeah.
there is a power in really living out an example of that's not the only way to think about food. We can
Right.
actually think about food in a really nuanced way. Yeah, it's really important that we eat foods just for enjoyment. That is a really important human experience. At the same time, these foods, if we do eat them too much, that's not good for us.
Mm-hmm.
Like that will make us sick. And it's okay for kids to know that. It's also okay to set limits on foods. When we get into when we start to have a problem is when I'm saying you can only eat too many cookies because otherwise they're bad for you.
Right.
That actually sounds a little scary to a kid. You can only have two cookies because otherwise you're going to gain weight. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, now
That's
we're
bad.
these
Right.
qualifications,
Right.
right? This is where we bring in shame, we bring in guilt, we bring in fear, we bring in body stigma, all of these things. It's those qualifications. So, yeah, outside of, hey, yeah, we can have cookies, we're going to have them with lunch. Yeah, we can have cookies, we're going to have two each, we'll have more tomorrow. We can
Right.
set those limits. The more clearly we set the limits without these long explanations in the moment, I think the stronger they are, the more powerful they are, and the the less likely they are to add this emotional element to food. Because there are kids, they are going to get an eating disorder.
Right.
It's huge. It's genetic. Honestly, the genetics are there. Something triggers it. And yeah, there's risk factors that have to do with parenting, some of them, but you could do everything right and you could still end up with a kid who all of a sudden really is struggling. If you have been going through their whole life saying, hey, these foods aren't good or bad, they're different. We're going to have this, we're going to have that. We're not going to have that right now. We're going to have two of these. And you haven't been adding the emotional baggage. You haven't been adding the good,
Right.
bad food. You will be so glad at that point where your child is in therapy that you've already begun that flexible thinking.
Sure.
You'll be so glad that you've done that because now you're already years ahead because your kid already has in their mind, oh, there is another way of thinking about food. So much of eating disorders is a rigid black and white way of thinking. And if you have been modeling over all those years, you've already started to build that habit of flexible thinking, even if it wasn't enough, even if they still get an eating disorder,
Right.
it still matters. It still matters a lot. And they're going to be ahead of the curve when it comes to recovery.
Well, let's shift gears. I love just there's so many different feeding related questions, but that makes complete sense to me that like the way that we model is the most important thing when it comes to the way that our kids often think about foods. And I'm thinking specifically about the modeling of like desserts as a reward versus your approach. So I think a lot of parents are like, if you eat this, you get this. If you don't eat this, you don't get this. And that isn't how we do it at our house. But I think a lot of parents do come from that place. And your nuanced advice has really been helpful here. And I think it just points to there's a lot of nuance here. So if a parent is saying, hey, I don't want to get into this dessert as a reward, how should I actually ensure that they're eating the food that I'd like them to eat and not just, putting out the cookies and having them just eat the cookies and then be done?
Sure. And this is going to vary and the strategies are going to vary. And I
Sure.
always like to start with that because I could give you all the strategies and you could try them all and be like, I hate these.
Yeah.
That's fine because they're not a good fit for you. But I think the biggest thing to remember is if you say, hey, you can have cookies after you eat this broccoli, what your kid is hearing is cookies are better than broccoli. That's the exact opposite of what you really deeply want them to think, which is
Sure.
cookies and broccoli are both important, but I need to eat a lot more broccoli in my life than cookies, right? I need my vegetables. That's what we want them to kind of soak in. My body needs those vegetables. My body needs variety. My body also needs some fun. So when we're constantly using dessert, they get into that habit. And honestly, this is maybe the only one area of research where I have seen just about every researcher agree. Hey, if you can avoid using sweets and desserts as a reward, do it.
Yeah.
Because it just kind of messes with their motivations. So to get away from that, there's a couple strategies. Some are kind of weird. Hey, serve dessert at the same time you serve the meal, but serve a
Right.
very limited portion.
Okay.
Amount that would be limited such that it wouldn't fill your child up. They
Got
should
it. So
still
they're
be
still going to be
hungry.
hungry. It's not like,
Yeah.
here's all the cookies and here's the chicken. You choose, kid.
Exactly. Right, exactly. And it's amazing. I find this tends to work pretty well with the younger kids. Like I have seen my own toddlers just leave the cookie on the plate, take one bite, leave the cookie on the plate. Not
Right.
that every kid would do that, and my kids are definitely sweet obsessed now, probably wouldn't leave the cookie on the plate. There's so many factors that go into whether a kid eats a whole cookie as they get older. But that's one strategy that's worked for a lot of families. Another one is just don't serve dessert.
Okay.
If you want to have cookies, great, serve them at another time when there's
Sure.
less stress. Because at dinner, you're feeling the stress of this is the meal where I prepared all the vegetables and they haven't eaten any vegetables all day. And it's also the stressful meal. The kids are tired, you're tired, you're
Right.
like gearing up for bedtime, which may be okay in your house and maybe an absolute crazy mess right now. So you're putting all this pressure on the hardest meal of the day and then you throw dessert in.
Right.
The easy solution is just don't don't throw
Just
dessert
skip
into
it.
that
Yeah.
mix.
Yeah. Okay.
Skip it. Serve the dessert on the weekend during lunch. Serve it during snack. There's plenty of other times for dessert.
Sure.
And then the other thing you could do is to just kind of separate dessert from the meal. Okay, we have the meal, and then we do serve dessert as bedtime snack, regardless of whether the kid ate the meal or not.
Right.
if you're going to be offering, say, an unlimited portion of dessert at that bedtime snack, you are giving your child the opportunity to just skip dinner knowing they can fill
Sure.
up a
They'll fill up
bedtime
later.
snack.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of, different strategies are going to work for different families, but the more you can kind of separate that connection of I have to, dessert is, eating vegetables is just my ticket to dessert.
Right.
We want to get away from that idea and more, hey, I eat my vegetables because I've learned to like them. And then I eat my dessert because it's delicious.
That's what we've done at our house is the latter most of the ones that you described kind of. We can't corral all the cats back together for like a later serving of dessert, but we don't offer dessert until most people have eaten most of their meal. And then the kids like they have this idea that our youngest one doesn't know if they say the word tea instead of treats. And so they say, can we have teas now? Which Helen, our now 5-year-old, definitely knows and will call out herself. But once we get to that point, then if most people have relatively finished eating, they're like, yeah, you guys can have a treat now. And we just offer it regardless of how much they ate at the dinner table. And
Yeah.
that has worked out well for us. And I'm sure that's advice that I snagged from one of your Instagram reels back in the day. But it has made it so that it's not something where we're constantly like keeping score or we have to get out some sort of rubric to figure out like you ate this much, you're entitled to this much. Like it's just too complicated. And
Yeah,
if
how
we
many
could just keep it
bites?
simple. Yeah, like instead of how many bites, it's just like, okay, we're moving on from this course to the next course. Regardless of how much you ate in the last course, we're now moving forward.
We're now moving forward. Right. And I just like to bring up one thing for parents to keep in mind. Let's say you find yourself in a position where you are just in a hard parenting position. You've got a hard kid.
Right.
And you're like, you know what? This candy reward thing that we have going on is saving our life right now.
Yeah,
You're not going to ruin your child if you bribe them with dessert.
sure.
Like it may result in things you don't love or things might go wrong, but this is not something that's going to ruin your kid. So many parents just don't ask me, "Hey, is this going to ruin my kid?" They literally come and say, "How much have I ruined my kid by
Right.
doing XYZ?" No, the answer is no, you haven't ruined your kid. These things aren't going to ruin your child. They're
Yeah,
just not.
I think a lot of parents because there's so little nuance on social media and it's so easy to rile up anxiety
Yeah.
that is what I hear all the time too. Like these very little minute things, whether it's food, whether it's screens, whether it's bedtime or something along those lines. Like I think parents have been trained through the algorithmic learning that kids are very fragile. And if you say
Yeah.
the wrong words, or if you do something in the wrong order, or if you don't do just so, then your child is ruined. And we just know that that's not the case. And that if instead we focus on being warm and nurturing and setting boundaries and holding expectations, that there's so much nuance of all the little things that you can really apply the your mileage may vary sort of
Yeah.
approach to like, this is what's working for our family in this season of life.
Right, that's the other thing. They could change. Sometimes I feel like you get a new kid every 3 months.
Right.
Like, wait a second. This was working when they were a baby, and now all of a sudden they're still a baby, but it's not working at all. They're constantly changing, and the dynamics between multiple kids is always changing. It's always exciting.
Let's get into the weeds a little bit on a couple of specific areas. One of them is food dyes, and that in particular because it's really come up like recently with all the political stuff. What's the research currently at when it comes to food dyes, behaviors, ADHD, those
Yeah.
sorts of things? And how should we as parents think about that?
Yeah. So first of all, if food diet isn't going to give your child ADHD or any behavior problems. Second of all, some kids are affected by food dyes. Their behaviors are affected by food dyes. We suspect that one of our kids, maybe not so much now, but previously was affected by food dyes. However, we don't need a ton of them. And so it just wasn't honestly that big of a deal. For us,
Sure.
we just tried to avoid them. But I think the whole focus on food dye brings, we're asking the wrong question when we're saying, oh, does food dye affect our kids? Because what we're really saying is, if I feed my child food dye, am I ruining their health? That's
Right.
really what it feels like when we look at
Right.
social media posts on, because the vast majority, research shows the vast majority of children are not behaviorally affected by food dyes. So if you got a kid with ADHD, if you suspect, if you're like, yeah, my kid seems funky when they have some food dye, you don't have to feed it to them.
Sure.
You can avoid it. But also, if they have food dye now and then, it again, it's not going to ruin your child. But I think the bigger question is, where have we put food dye in the order of what affects our kids the most? So
Right.
in Feed Them Well, I talk about the health impact tiers, which are where we talk about what's going to have the broadest impact on your child's health. And at the top of that is calories. Are they eating enough calories? Because guess what? If they're not, that is the biggest problem we could possibly have.
Sure.
Next, we're talking about, we're talking about protein. We are talking about making sure your kid has clean drinking water. We're talking about these really big, impactful things. Fiber. 95% of kids in the United States aren't eating enough fiber.
Right.
And we kind of say, oh, yeah, they're constipated or this, that, or the other thing. Fiber is cancer prevention. It is gut health. It's your child's immune system. It is so many things. And so, yes, food dye makes a great headline. But in
Right.
terms of my 6 impact tiers, that's not showing up until, I don't know, 4 or 5, right?
Right.
Because while it is important, it's not going to have the broadest impact on your child.
Right.
So, and the other thing is, if you're curious about it, if you're like, man, I just really am worried about food dyes. Okay, well then let's do a little challenge here. Take it out of your child's diet for 2 weeks. Write down what you see.
Right.
If possible, have someone who doesn't know you're doing this also write down what they see. Give them food dyes for 2 weeks. Again, write down what you're seeing.
Right.
And then do it again, because it's so easy for us as parents to lie to ourselves to make up what
Like,
we saw.
this made a big difference.
If we're doing this twice, and if there's 2 parents, if both parents are doing it, if there's a teacher at school and she's willing to give you a few observations, great. That way, after you've done 2 rounds of this, you can say with a little bit more confidence, just in terms of your parenting, yeah, my kid is affected by food dyes, or actually no, they're really not. And then you can move forward with that. But you're not stuck in this, oh my gosh, food dyes are going
Right.
to do all the things. What's really going to do all the things is if they're not eating a broad diet over time,
Right.
and they're never eating the fruits and vegetables, and like these are the things that are boring.
Right.
Then
Yeah,
if they're not
it's less
sleeping-
splashy, it's less press conferencey when it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, they need more fiber. There's or adequate calories and protein and
Help
those
them
sorts of
get
things.
more fruits and
It's just like
vegetables.
the nuances are so much more boring than the really
Yes.
exciting things. I do have a lot of families that come in because we do a lot of ADHD work, and like they tell me like we eliminated food dyes, and yet still here we are.
Right.
Like
Right.
it didn't solve everything. And I tell them, yeah, I mean, I echo your points exactly. Is like it affects some kids. It doesn't cause ADHD. And if they're behaviorally more challenging when they're food dyes, avoid them. But it's not like this is like, it's not imprinted into their DNA in their brain if they had Skittles one time, that it just has these ongoing effects.
Yes,
They may be more
right.
sensitive for it, and they may be a little bit more wired for sound for a few hours afterwards, but then the
Right.
effect diminishes. It's not like it doesn't dye their brain red 40 and then they're always
Yes.
going to have the behavioral issues that you're
Exactly.
facing in the
I mean,
moment.
even some of the research is like, they actually, I remember one study, and I'm not going to get into the details because don't quote me on the numbers because it was a while ago, but they actually said, okay, for these kids who are affected by food dye, if we remove it, what is the effect in terms of as if we were to give them medication?
Right.
And it was something like, I don't know, like an eighth of a dose of medication
Yeah.
that they were giving to these kids by taking food dye out. And if you think of that, you're like, okay, well, that's not enough to manage their ADHD symptoms. Like suddenly giving them a whole foods diet is great. That'd be great for kids with ADHD. Do it as much as you can, which is hard
Right.
if you have a kid with ADHD, but also realize that may not be enough. There's a whole lifestyle that needs to go around it. And often we're thinking, oh, but if I could just get that one little magic bullet, red 40 or yellow 11 or, whatever
Right.
it is, yellow 5, it'll fix it. It probably won't.
Well, we hear these public health messages, and it gets echoed that like, oh, ADHD is so rampant and everything, and there are so many food dyes, so they must be related. When it's like, well, kids are on their screens late, and they don't get to play outside as much, and they get recess taken away, and there's much bigger issues, and we're often like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic when it comes to like what actually matters for kids and families. Right. Can we talk specifically a little bit more about ARFID and picky eating and like how do we go about distinguishing? You talk in your book, there was a good example that I had written down that was like the kid that's the typically picky eater that doesn't like broccoli versus the child that only has 7 foods and is at, has iron deficiency anemia or something along those lines. I think that they're very far apart on the spectrum, but how do parents decide if this is typical picky eating versus ARFID versus something else? Like how should parents think about that?
So for me, like it does get into the weeds. It can get so far into the weeds that I created a tool with a team of credentialed specialists, pediatric specialists, so gastroenterologists, eating disorder therapists, pediatricians, OTs, all sorts of things. So we created a screener. It's called the Pediatric Screener for ARFID and Extreme Picky Eating, otherwise known as the PSA EAT. It is just out today. Awesome. And it gives you the information. Like you tell them, you write down what's going on, check the boxes, what's going on. And then instantly, and by instantly, I mean 20, 30 seconds later, you get the details. This is an indicator of ARFID. This is not an indicator of ARFID. This is an indicator of ARFID. So what you're actually understanding is, what I thought was like really big problem, that's actually, that might not be that big of a problem. And also these things that I really had this gut feeling that wasn't right. You're going to get some confirmation for that. You're going to have a piece of, the email that you can print out, bring to your provider and say, look, I'm really concerned about my child's eating. These are the indicators that I'm concerned about. And can we do an assessment for ARFID?
Sure.
Because you're always going to need information about their behaviors and what's going on at home, as well as their physical status at that time. Got it. So that it's really, the easiest way is really to just take the screener.
Because otherwise it's complicated and tricky to know. But if you can have some objective data, that makes it much easier. Have you found of late that ARFID diagnoses are on the rise? And if so, is it that they're getting diagnosed more? Are there actually more higher incidence of it? Like what's the scoop there?
Yeah. So the most recent research as of about 2 months ago was that diagnoses are going up relative to anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa. Okay. And it's not known at this time whether it's because we finally have a diagnosis. So it became diagnosable in 2013.
Okay, so it's tough to know incidence.
It's so early that we just really don't know. But we do know the prevalence is on par with anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa and some of these other eating disorders. So yeah, it's definitely there. And what we find is that the majority of parents who take the screener are the ones who knew something was off.
Sure.
You're not taking the screener for fun. If you're like, my kid's picky is fine, you're not going to take the screener. Right. But if you're like, gosh, this has just been going on and on. This has been happening since they were a baby. This can't be normal. I'm so stressed about this. Right. If you've got these feelings of something is wrong, then you could take 3 minutes and kind of get some data to back up your feeling.
I'll put the link in the show notes so that people can find that if that's something that they're feeling like, gosh, I need more information about. Let's say we have the diagnosis of ARFID. What does the typical approach look like to managing that? Let's just say for like a late toddler, early school age child. I'm sure it varies dramatically, but are there any big principles?
And the average age of diagnosis is 11 to 13.
Okay, well, let's skip the toddler then. I was thinking my own patients that often have like neurodivergence as well, but
neurodivergence and eating issues they overlap tremendously.
Sure.
So So much so that some researchers have said, look, if you have a kid with ARFID, we should do an assessment for neurodivergence, and vice versa. That's how much overlap there is. But okay, let's say you have these concerns. You have likely brought them up several times with your
Sure.
healthcare provider.
Right.
That's what we're constantly hearing.
Totally.
And so you go in and you say, I really think something is wrong. My 5-year-old, you said they're going to grow out of their picky eating. It's only gotten worse. And now they're eating 11 foods. Or
Right.
maybe they're eating 20 foods, but you're like, they're not eating any fruits or vegetables, right? That's actually not typical, right? And if, a provider might say, oh, they'll grow out of it.
Yeah.
But you've already been hearing that
Right.
for 2 years, right? You're like, well, I don't know. This isn't feeling right. Now you go in with some data. You say, no, this is not typical. Can we do some assessments?
Right.
When we have the assessment, we can do growth chart assessment, we can do blood work, and I have a accredited continuing education program for providers as well. Because
Awesome.
what I find is like, and that is like almost out. So it's right around the corner. But I find that sometimes people talk to their provider and then the provider says, oh no, it's not ARFID. It couldn't be ARFID.
Yeah.
Well, that's because there hasn't been enough time for providers to really be thoroughly educated in ARFID. It
Totally.
just,
I think a lot of parents hear the same sort of thing around autism. Like, he
Yes.
smiled at me, he can't be autistic. Or,
Exactly.
she talks great, she can't be autistic. And it's like,
Right.
well, there's a lot more nuance to it than just like the looking at you and the talking to you of making this
Exactly.
diagnosis. And I think ARFID is
Right.
similar.
It's like, oh, well, he's still growing. He's not losing
yeah,
weight.
yeah, there's a
Like,
gradation.
yeah,
Right.
but actually there's kids with ARFID can also have a very high weight. They can have a low weight. They can be totally typical, right? So, if you are being dismissed by a provider, you can also say, "Hey, I know of this continuing education. It's accredited. You get your credits for it." But okay, so you go in, you ask your provider for an assessment. Providers, okay, yeah, let's do the assessment. Let's make sure their blood work is aligned. So we wanna approach this from two sides.
Okay.
We need psychological recovery and we need physical
Okay.
recovery. You're gonna
Okay.
work with your provider to get the physical recovery. We're stabilizing blood work, stabilizing weight, these sorts of things. And then also we're going to be working on psychological recovery. How are they thinking about food? Are we building that flexible mindset? Are we building the executive functions that they need to actually begin to learn to eat on their own so that they have enough variety and the ability to eat enough volume to actually meet their needs? They're
Got it.
probably never going to be like an adventurous eater. I mean, they might be, but you never know. But they still need to have enough flexibility that maybe you can travel, maybe you can go to an event, maybe they can go out on a date and
Right.
when they're a teen and be able to order something. These sorts of things become a bigger issue the older the kids get when we can't be there to kind of fix every issue. And
Totally.
so we want to help them be able to live their life, even if they do have a more restrictive diet than most people. But they can have full recovery without relapse, as long as they do both the physical and the psychological recovery. The first step is usually what's called a family behavioral intervention, where the parent is saying, okay, let's learn to do kind of a therapeutic lifestyle at home. And then as the kid gets older, sometimes there's one-on-one therapies that are needed. And of course, depending on what other elements, maybe neurodivergence or other issues there may be occupational therapists or speech language pathologists, dietitians involved. It often requires that parent behavior change and some one-on-one services, as well as working with primary care.
Well, I think that really helps because it seems like something that parents hear about, but they
Yeah.
feel like, it's probably not me. But having a useful tool allows them to get some objective data and also get the reassurance or the, hey, we need to take the next step. So I think that
Yes.
I'm all for any time that we can just take it out of the realm of the vibes and
Yes,
move it into
yes.
the realm of like the objective data that then we
Right.
can track over time, and that gives us the tools that we need to actually move forward.
Right.
This has been such a great discussion. And there's so many nuances that we could talk about that I would love to have you back on again as the book gets closer. But I would encourage everybody to go to wherever you buy books and pre-order Feed Them Well, not Eat Them Well, Feed Them Well, so that you can learn about all of these nuances. And I would hope that parents, after our discussion today, would also take to heart that like social media is created to keep you on social media, which means that anxiety is provoked on purpose. And when we can have these more nuanced conversations, it actually helps us to know what to do like at 6 p.m. when it's mealtime, but also gives us the peace of mind that like our kids are not as fragile as they've been made out to be by those that want to make it, very anxiety provoking and clickbait worthy to offer parenting advice.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I will send everyone away. I'll include in the show notes where to check out the PSA Eat, where to get your book. And until next time, keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for having me.